And the way that he spoke and the authentic way that he really does care about each and every person that approaches him, that wants to learn, what he's been learning. He's compassionate, he's kind, and it wasn't a freedom rally. I met you in Huntington Beach at that other thing that you did with Dr. Dr. DeMoss. And then I saw you at the Freedom Rally, and I said, do you want to spend the night at my house? I have a room if you need to have a room. And he came to mine and my husband's house, and he spent the night, and he came on my radio show, Awakening Code Radio. And I've been watching him on this circuit really take in a lot of information and dissect it and make it palatable for people like me, who I tend to think with my heart rather than my brain. And I had a hard time wrapping my head around what he's going to be talking about tonight. So I was thrilled to see that he was coming to bless us with his presence and his presentation. And how many of you have heard Alec speak before? Anybody? You have? That's why you're here, I bet, huh? Yeah, you need a deeper dive. You're going for round 2, huh? Well, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend, Alec Zeck. Please give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to all 10 of you who are here. I made a joke, though. This will be a stand-up routine instead of a talk. But I made a joke to my wife earlier. She's like, how many people do you think will show up? I'm like, honestly, this is not my typical crowd, so we'll see. And it's okay. Whoever is in this room needs to be here, and that's okay. It's funny, though, because I've given this talk in front of, I spoke at Weston A. Price Conference in October. That was in front of like 500 people. I've given this in small groups in front of like 10. So it's anytime I can get this message out, and such an important message, I don't care how many people are in the room. It's such an important thing to talk about. Okay, so I want to add some context to where we're going. So according to the CDC's own data, 95% of COVID deaths had an average of 4 comorbidities, most being lifestyle and nutrition related. 79% of hospitalizations were in overweight or obese people. And then this was a study conducted by the CDC between March of 2020 and March of 2021 on 540,000 people who had been hospitalized with, quote, COVID cases and then subsequently died. And they found that the second strongest risk factor for death associated with COVID was fear/anxiety related disorders. Haven't heard that one before. I know everyone has probably heard of how big of an impact fear has, but have you heard that study before? No, right? Right. Okay, what happens when we're conditioned to believe in something that may not even exist? What happens when we're conditioned to believe in something that is pathogenic and potentially deadly, something that could be anywhere but is invisible to the naked eye? Think about that. Okay, does Santa Claus exist? Yes? Okay. From the time that you're able to form somewhat complex thoughts as a child, you're told that Santa Claus exists, and you're told that, or you're shown all this evidence that he exists, the presents under the tree, the songs, the movies, the decorations, the half-eaten cookies and milk on Christmas morning, the pieces of beer in the fireplace, the reindeer hoof tracks in your yard, the Santa Claus sleigh tracking app, or watching Fox News or another indoctrinating agency and watching them follow Santa's trajectory across the sky. All of those things mean Santa Claus actually exists, right? Right? It's the best fit model we have to explain it right now, so it must exist, right? Of course, that would be wrong. But even if we have measurable and observable effects, like our parents tell us, like, you've been such a great kid, Santa's going to bring you a lot of gifts this year. You feel joy related to Santa Claus. Santa Claus doesn't actually exist. If your parents, or if you're a bad kid and your parents are threatening you that you're not going to get any gifts this year, Santa's not going to bring you gifts, you feel fear, and you have measurable and observable fear arise in your body. Those are actual symptoms that are expressed, but Santa Claus doesn't actually exist, does it? Okay. This analogy comes from Dr. Tom Cowan's book, The Contagion Myth. For those of you who've not read it, I highly recommend it. But if I were to tell you that a ping pong ball could break through a brick wall, of course, you'd want to see evidence of that. So, okay, the first thing I do is I pour a bunch of corrosive acid on the brick wall. And I take a giant mallet and smash the brick wall several times. And then I tape a ping pong ball to a giant boulder and whirl it as hard as I can at the brick wall, and the brick wall falls down. Voila, I have proven that the ping pong ball caused the destruction of that brick wall, right? Right? No, of course not. Okay, so how does that relate to virology? I'm going to skip that slide because I'm going to surprise you. Okay, so if I were to tell you that SARS-CoV-2 had not been isolated or proven to exist, a lot of you have probably heard this before, but that's okay. If I were to tell you that, you would probably go on to PubMed or Google Scholar or contact one of your friends who's an expert or just find some mainstream news source, some fact checker that debunks this, and you would say, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed studies that say otherwise. How can you possibly make the claim that SARS-CoV-2 has never been isolated or shown to exist or cause any disease? The problem is, what we take to mean isolate is in virtually the rest of the world is drastically different than what virology takes to mean isolate. And the reality is virology actually does not have a clear definition on what isolate means, which I'll get to in a minute. But what we take it to mean in the rest of society is to separate from another substance so as to obtain in a pure free state, which is from the Webster's Dictionary. We mean having a thing completely by itself, separate of all other things, right? Okay, so in that same paper, here's the methods section for that paper, which, as I've learned over the last 4 years, is the most important part to read out of any scientific paper, showing you exactly how they conduct the experiment. So if you look at the methods section of that paper, or literally any paper in the entire field of virology, you'll find that this is what happens. They take fluids from a sick patient that are assumed to contain virus particles. They never validate that there are actually virus particles inside the fluids. They're assumed to contain virus particles. They then add that to what's called viral transport medium. Inside viral transport medium is, at a minimum, gentamicin and amphotericin B, which are cytotoxic antimycotics and antibiotics that are keeping the experimental environment free of bacterial and fungal growth, but that's an important point I'll get to in a second. So that's inside viral transport medium. They then take that mixture, they sometimes filter it, sometimes centrifuge it, rarely both, and then they'll add it to a bunch of foreign cells, typically monkey kidney cells, which are called Vero E6. You can see here, they used African green monkey kidney cells, right? So they add them to monkey kidney cells. They'll also add trypsin, sometimes Delbecco's minimal essential medium or Delbecco's modified eagle medium, which is essentially a food source for the cell. More gentamicin or geneticin, which is another antibiotic. Amphotericin B, penicillin streptomycin. Then they'll add fetal bovine serum. But relative to other cell cultures, they reduce the nutrient intake, the amount of fetal bovine serum. The cells experience what is called the cytopathic effect, which means the cells break down into a bunch of fragments after all these substances have been added. Sample is then collected and prepared for electron microscopy, and then electron micrograph images is produced, and they point to the particles on the image and say, oh, these are viruses. So essentially, at the end of that, when they point to them and say that these are viruses, you see what they're doing there. They're saying these particles must have been inside the fluids of a sick person. Never mind, we never validated that they were there. These particles must be what caused the cells to experience the cytopathic effect. Never mind that we starved them, poisoned them, which I'll get to in a second. These must be what were passed to this person to cause illness in them, right? And this is the foundational evidence for all of virology, in every case for every virus. Okay, 3 major branches of science. Today we're going to be talking about natural science. The other 2 have asterisks by them because they're not technically science, but I'll explain that later. Okay, natural science is the study of natural phenomena. Natural science tries to explain and predict nature's phenomena based on empirical evidence. In natural science, a hypothesis must be verified scientifically to be regarded as a scientific theory. Scientific method is a method of discovering knowledge about the natural world. This is all basic stuff we learned in grade school at some point. But it's crazy that we actually overlook this when it comes to virology and much of cellular biology, which I'll get to in a second. So we already know all this. This is what the scientific method is. So here's these steps of the scientific method, just to reiterate what you learned in like 3rd or 4th grade. Observe a natural phenomenon. And then you formulate a hypothesis, which includes assigning an independent variable, dependent variable. The independent variable is the presumed cause, the thing you think is causing the observed natural phenomenon in question. Does that make sense? You guys tracking on that? Yeah? Okay, cool. So observing a natural phenomenon requires that the situation is not manipulated or controlled by the investigator. The situation has not been initiated or created by the investigator. So an example would be observe several people in the same space getting sick with similar symptoms. Observe people coughing in the same space or in the same community. Hypothesis, a proposed explanation for that phenomena. Okay, so your hypothesis in this case could be, I think a particle in the fluids or particles in the fluids of these people, viruses, are causing them to become sick. Okay, in order to proceed to experimentation, you need to show that these particles, the independent variable, the presumed cause, the thing you think is the cause of the observed natural phenomenon in question, actually exist. You need to do that before you proceed to experimentation, going back to the steps of the scientific method. The presumed cause, the independent variable, right? They jump to just assuming that the independent variable is in the fluids of a sick person without ever validating that they're actually present. They assume that the virus is producing the cytopathic effect. Cell culture itself contains too many confounding variables, as I mentioned earlier. They assume the confounding variables don't have an impact on the culture, right? They assume that the amphotericin B, gentamicin, reducing the nutrient intake don't have an impact on the culture. Culturing process itself is not natural, of course, when we go back to the steps of the scientific method. Situation has not been initiated or created by the investigator, right? No proper control experiments. Now, virologists will refer to what's called a mock-infected culture, but as Dr. Mark Bailey has shown multiple times, and another friend of mine, Jacob Diaz, contact and author of a paper, in the mock-infected culture, they treat the mock-infected culture with a lower concentration of antibiotics and antimycotics, which means that they're not actually doing the exact same thing that they're doing in the experimental culture. You guys following what I'm saying? So they're treating it with less antibiotics and antimycotics. So virology, therefore, does not adhere to the scientific method. Pseudoscience consists of statements, beliefs, or practices that claim to be both scientific and factual, but are incompatible with the scientific method. So is virology a science? No. Scientific theory, an explanation of an aspect of the natural world and universe that has been repeatedly tested and corroborated in accordance with the scientific method. So this, for the sake of this presentation, I'm focusing largely on viruses, but again, you'll have to take my word or go to your own research. Or watch the end of COVID. This also applies to bacteria, fungi, et cetera. But so we'll say for this term, viral theory, is that a proper theory? No, it's not a proper theory because it has not been repeatedly tested and corroborated in accordance with the scientific method. So can we do a scientific experiment on Santa Claus? Can we? No. Why not? Right. Okay. Back to the ping pong ball and brick wall analogy. You see how that relates to exactly what virologists do in their experiments? Right. Okay. So when you ask, as I've done, as Dr. Tom Cowan, Andy Kaufman, several others have done, why viruses cannot be isolated, purified, characterized, and sequenced directly from the fluids of a sick person, these are the four answers we most commonly come across. The virus is too weak to isolate or purify directly from the fluids. Which is interesting because a virus also travels freely through the air, lands on a surface, survives on a surface for upwards of 2 to 3 days, makes it all the way to a body, makes it to a cell, breaks into the cell, hijacks the cell's machinery, and begins a replication process which overwhelms the body where it's excreted out of that person. But it's too weak to isolate or purify directly from the fluids. There's not enough virus present in the fluids to isolate or purify it. This is one we commonly hear too. And so Tom and Andy asked some virologists, well, how much fluids from people sick with, let's say, SARS-CoV-2 as an example, would you need? 10,000 samples from 10,000 people? And they're like, not enough. What about 100,000 people? Not enough. How is there not enough when they claim that in one single sneeze, there are over 200 million virus particles? There's not enough to isolate or purify it. A virus needs a host in order to replicate, so that's why we use a cell culture. Doesn't make any sense because, again, if this virus is inside the fluids of a sick person, you should be able to take it directly from the fluids of a sick person, and they have chemists isolate and purify particles smaller than viruses are alleged to be all the time. There's actually another chemist named Saeed Qureshi who's outspoken about the fraud of virology because he, as a chemist, isolates and purifies particles smaller than viruses all the time without having to commit circular reasoning as they're doing here. Then the last one is you're not a virologist, you don't get to determine what isolation is. So that's an appeal to authority. Okay, so other components of the culture media, amphotericin B, as I said, and you can look this up yourself, it is known to cause acute renal failure. So let's think about that for a second. Amphotericin B is being added to monkey kidney cells in these experiments. And they're assuming that it has no negative effect on the culture. Amphotericin B, you can type it on Google yourself. Amphotericin B, toxic kidneys. You'll find a number of peer-reviewed studies. You'll also find countless examples where they explain that it is known to cause renal failure. Gentamicin, same thing. And these are some of the other substances they have. So trypsin is an example. There is one study where the resultant particles did not have the characteristic spikes. So then they went back and added trypsin, which is a protease. It essentially breaks down proteins. And then it produced the characteristic spikes. And they said, oh, here we go. Now we have SARS-CoV-2 after they added trypsin. Think about the logic in that. There is none. Okay, so amphotericin B, here's an example of a study. Our results indicate that the use of amphotericin B may facilitate influenza virus isolation production vira cells. In other words, amphotericin B is very toxic and increases in cellular breakdown. Another one. Our data reveal that gentamicin has a significant cytotoxic and adverse effect on the cell viability. In other words, gentamicin is very toxic and increases cellular breakdown. Fetal bovine serum is a common component of animal cell culture media. It is harvested from bovine fetuses taken from pregnant cows during slaughter. It is taken while they are alive, typically. This is like a cult ritual, and this is used in pretty much all of cell biology. Okay, so what about these pictures? What about these pictures that we see everywhere? So this is a quote from a virologist by the name of Stefan Lanka. In every single photograph of a virus, you'll find that it's from a cell culture, which is that experiment that I just described. It is never from the blood, never from the saliva, never from the semen, never from another liquid of the body, not from a human, not from an animal, not from a plant. It always comes as a result of that experiment that I just described. They've never actually demonstrated via electron micrograph imagery or otherwise that viruses exist in the fluids of a sick person. You want to take a picture of that? Tell me when you're good. Good? Okay. Okay, so here's this is from a biologist by the name of Harold Hillman. And if you had told me 4 years ago I'd have a favorite biologist, I would have said you're high as hell. There's no way I would have cared. But my favorite biologist, his name's Harold Hillman, and he says that when a tissue is prepared for histology, hysterectomy, et cetera, or electron microscopy, which is what produces those images, what produces those, an animal is killed, the tissue is excised, it is fixed or frozen, embedded, it is stained, it is sectioned, rehydrated, mounted, radiated by light, or bombarded by electron beams. So if I were to take you and do that to you right now, would you look like you looked before? No, exactly. Right. So when we see these images, they produce countless and an unknown amount of what are called artifacts. And artifacts are essentially, we don't know if what we're seeing is the result of the experimental procedure itself rather than what was naturally occurring in that biological sample. And think also the fact that they're adding all of this stuff on a monkey kidney cell and then it's breaking down and then they do all these steps to it and then they produce these images and then they claim that the little resultant particles are viruses. That's literally how it's done. And then we have countless studies where they, in electron micrograph images, have found morphologically indistinguishable particles that are not viral. Essentially, in this study, what they found in these renal biopsies from people previous to the COVID era and also during the COVID era that tested, quote, negative for COVID, which is circular reasoning. But the point being that they found morphologically indistinguishable particles from SARS-CoV-2, and they themselves in these studies are like, these are not viral particles. Meaning that these images that we're finding, and here's another study, this article shows that normal cell structures that are essentially are clathrin-coated vesicles could easily be confused with, quote, SARS-CoV-2 or coronaviruses. In this study, most of the published images depicting the suspected virus are very similar, if not identical, to multivesicular bodies. We have countless examples of these studies where in electron micrograph images, they're finding particles that are virtually indistinguishable from what virologists and molecular biologists refer to as viruses. You see the problem with that? You guys catching on? Okay. Yeah, we have countless. So, I mean, here's supposedly different viruses, right? And they're virtually indistinguishable. I mean, they are indistinguishable. Okay, so you might be wondering right by now, where in the hell did they come up with this in the first place? Yeah, like where the hell did they come up with this method, right? Right? It's very important, especially because they're trying to push gain-of-function viruses as if it's a real thing. Okay, so this method of, quote, isolating viruses came from the 1950s by a man by the name of John Franklin Enders, claimed to have isolated the measles virus. And in his experimental procedure, he used the following at various points: milk, penicillin, streptomycin, bovine amniotic fluid, heparin, beef embryo extract, horse serum, more antibiotics, phenol red, soybean trypsin, formalin, which is formaldehyde, hematoxylin, eosin, and they put all that on a rhesus monkey kidney cell. Cytopathic effect occurred, and he pointed to the particles and said that those are viruses, right? He also, though, and what's crazy is that this is the foundational paper for all of modern virology. And he ended up winning a Nobel Prize for helping to develop the measles vaccine afterwards, which I think is largely why this was ushered in for all of virology. He's sort of competing against Salk for the polio vaccine, but he did the exact same experimental procedure, except he did not add any throat washings, blood, or feces, or any sample from a measles patient, right? So meaning he did the exact same experimental procedure that he had done to, quote, isolate the measles virus, except he did not have any possible sample of measles present. You guys following? And the exact same effect occurred, and this was what he was quoted as saying. The cytopathic changes it induced in the unstained preparations could not be distinguished with confidence from the viruses isolated from measles. See how he's already presupposing viruses, even though in the control experiment, he got the exact same results and there was no possible source of viruses present. Pretty crazy, right? This was ushered in for all of modern virology. This is literally what they based their initial experiments off of. Okay, sorry, my slides messed up when I transferred over this computer. But a modern version of a control experiment was done by that virologist I brought up earlier, Stefan Lanka. And he did the exact same steps that virologists do now in the modern era, except he did not include any human sample, ergo no possible presence of any virus particles. And what he got was the exact same cytopathic effect that virologists get, with the exact same result in particles. Now, Stefan Lanka, because good luck getting grant funding on this, did not have an electron microscope, but he did have a light microscope. But nonetheless, the cytopathic effect still occurred, and he was able to produce light microscope images showing that the exact same effect that virologists point to and claim as being viral occurs without any possible viral source present. And I don't want to get into sequencing stuff now, that's for another time, but then he added yeast RNA and he was able to get almost 100% of the, quote, SARS-CoV-2 genome with yeast RNA as a replacement inside the culture. Okay, so is anyone familiar with Christine Massey? Oh, what? Okay, you guys need to be. So Christine Massey is a lady out of Canada who has submitted I think it's over like 225 now, I haven't updated this part of my presentation, FOIA requests to various government and health institutions across the world. And what she asks, just so you know, there's no trick here, she asks all records in the possession, custody, or control of the Center for Disease Control or whatever agency she's submitting the FOIA request to, describing the isolation of SARS-CoV-2 virus directly from a sample taken from a diseased patient, where the patient sample is not first combined with any other source of genetic material, i.e. monkey kidney cells, aka varicose cells, lung cells, or cells from a cancer patient. Meaning that she's saying not taking fluid from a sick person assumed to contain it and then adding it with all this other stuff. I just want proof that you have this directly in the fluids of a sick person where it is claimed to be, right? No tricks here, because people will say that she's tricking the way she's asking. This is literally her FOIA requests. In every single one of the request returns, this is what they say. A search for our records failed to reveal any documents pertaining to your request. These are the agencies claiming that there is a virus. And she's not only done it for SARS-CoV-2, she's done it for countless other so-called viruses. Ask them for evidence of the virus coming directly from the fluids or tissue of a sick person, and they do not have that evidence. And this isn't some random agency, this is the CDC, this is the FDA, these are government and health agencies around the world. And they do not have this evidence. Pretty damning, right? What about gain of function? What about viral genomics? What about PCR? And there's so much to this, so I don't have time to get into this right now. I have a resource at the very end of this presentation. But with respect to gain of function. I did want to include this because a lot of people say, well, they were covering it up. They were trying to cover up the truth about gain of function. So I did a custom Google search. I just did this last week and added this to my presentation because I didn't have this before. For date range December 2019 through April of 2020. And these are mainstream news sources clearly talking openly about the possibility of gain of function. They weren't censoring gain of function. They did afterwards, after they already seeded that idea across all of humanity. After they seeded the idea, oh, this might have come from a lab. This might have come from a lab. Gain of function experiments are dangerous. Then they started censoring. They already seeded the idea. They planted that in our heads because it serves their narrative now with disease X, which I'll get to in a little bit. I did it first. I absolutely did. Oh, good. You're an OG. You should get up here and speak. No, I believed it at first, Michelle. I did. I absolutely did. Yeah. Okay. And then when people try to claim, well, like they have developed whole phenotypes and like multiple lineages of viral families, blah, 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 blah. This is an article from February 2023 in BBC. Why the human genome was never completed. We know human beings exist, and they haven't even completed the human genome. You mean to tell me that they know what a fucking viral genome is? Give me a break. Okay, so if you have phones, I cannot recommend enough this resource. Like, please, please, please read this. It's been read by over 250,000 people across the world just on Dr. Sam Bailey's website. Her husband, Dr. Mark Bailey, wrote this paper called A Farewell to Virology, which goes into great details. It's been read by over 250,000 people and not one rebuttal. Not one. Because you can't. Because he takes their own data and shows how it's complete nonsense. Does everyone have that? You still need it? Anyone? Okay. Am I making sense? There's probably going to be some questions. Hopefully I'll have time. Okay, cool. Okay, and then other people say, well, no virus is a psyop that just came out of nowhere. Peter McCullough had the audacity to say, yeah, it's some fringe theory that came from Canada, this guy who tried to charge the Canadian government. It's not really something seriously to be taken, which is just absurd to me because there's an entire scientific group during the AIDS era called the Perth Group that was a group of scientists who were publishing papers related to the reality that HIV was never demonstrated to exist or be the cause of AIDS. And a lot of people quote Kary Mullis with respect to PCR. Kary Mullis was outspoken that HIV was never proven to exist or be the cause of AIDS. There was an entire scientific group back during this era, and this goes all the way back to the 1700s, 1800s with Antoine Béchamp and Louis Pasteur. This is not a new thing that viruses may not exist. Not at all. Okay, so back to formal science. So the study of formal systems such as those under the branch of logic, this goes back to my slide talking about formal science, talking about social sciences, and then talking about natural sciences. So formal science does not employ a scientific method, it employs an a priori, and it includes logic and mathematics. So we're going to talk about logic for a little bit. So what isn't logic? Logical fallacies 101, you'll see how this relates to virology. And this is something that is so helpful when it comes to discerning a legitimate argument or not. I cannot stress this enough. And I want to emphasize that I have beliefs that are unproven beliefs, just like everyone else does. But I clearly clarify when something is a belief of mine rather than taking a belief and making an assertion as if it is a measurable and observable, repeatable fact, right? You guys following what I'm saying there? Okay, so appeal to authority. An appeal to authority, you're essentially appealing to what an authority figure says as the basis for your argument, and that was an example. This happens all the time. Robert Malone is a vaccinologist, and he says the virus has been isolated, so you're wrong. Okay, can you show me the evidence? And we've actually challenged Robert Malone on that, and he blocked me on Twitter. So, bandwagon fallacy. The overwhelming majority of experts believe the virus has been isolated. This is an appeal to authority and a bandwagon fallacy. That's not a valid argument. That's not evidence. That does not take the place of evidence. Burden of proof fallacy. Well, where's your proof that the virus doesn't exist? Okay, that's literally no different than me saying, where's your proof that unicorns don't exist? It's no different. Where's your proof that walking garden gnomes with lasers for eyes don't exist? Show me proof they don't exist. The onus lies on those who are making the positive claim, the ones saying that something is. The onus is on them to provide evidence of such, not the people who are falsifying those claims saying that there is no evidence for it. So it's not on me to prove that viruses don't exist. You can't prove a negative. Begging the question, this one happens all the time, and that's how it relates to when I say that they don't actually find virus particles in the fluids. They then employ PCR tests, which were established without ever having a viral sample to begin with. But that's because they're begging the question in that they're already assuming the conclusion in one of their premises. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Affirming the consequent, this one happens all the time. Well, I got sicker than I've ever been, therefore I know the virus exists. Or I lost taste and smell, therefore I know the virus exists. That's what's called an affirming the consequent logical fallacy. If you are going to say that X exists first and causes Y, then you need to prove that X exists and causes Y. You can't point to Y occurring and say that that is proof of X. It's like if there is water all over your car and you say, it rained last night, but like none of your neighbors have water on their car. And it's like, no, I know it rained last night because there's water on my car. There's other explanations for why there's water on your car, right? Again, you need proof that it actually rained in that case. You can't just point to the water in your car and be like, oh, that's proof of rain. It can be possible indications of rain, but you need to demonstrate that the rain actually happened first. Reification fallacy, this one happens all the time too. Assigning any characteristics or attributes to viruses, saying that viruses mutate, saying that we have a virome, saying that viruses can't be isolated for X, Y, and Z purposes, saying that viruses require a cell, saying that viruses cause certain symptoms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a reification fallacy because you're assigning characteristics to something that is still fundamentally abstract and has not been demonstrated to be an actual thing. Okay, so then I get asked this, if not a virus, what's making us sick? That's one of my favorite ones to answer. There are so many other possible explanations for what causes us to become sick other than a virus. So many. And if this doesn't satisfy you, we have more to discuss because people will be like, well, what about Sally getting sick right after Johnny in daycare? Or like I was around someone and I got really sick. And I don't deny that phenomenon at all. Not even a little bit. Okay, what about bacteria, fungi, etc.? Or fungi. I like fungi being better than fun guy. Okay, so if I lived, or if I saw this scene, right, and I was a little kid, and I came upon another scene of firefighters fighting a fire, I would start to think without proper context that the firefighters were causing that fire, wouldn't I? Because I always see them at the scene of a fire like, shit, these guys are here causing these fucking fires. And maybe they are if they're committing arson or if they're part of the World Economic Forum trying to take people's land. But point being, like, I would mistake these guys who are there to clean up the fire as the cause of the fire if I didn't have the proper context. That is the case with bacteria and fungi. There's some nuance there, but point being, in every experimental attempt to demonstrate that an isolated form of bacteria causes illness, they're unsuccessful in doing so. If I were to swab the back of your guys' throats right now or swab your arms, you would have streptococcus or staphylococcus bacteria on you right now. Why don't you have a strep infection? Why don't you have a staph infection? Why not? It's because the bacteria is not the issue. The bacteria proliferates in large quantities in certain cases as nature's attempt to extinguish the toxicity or to return the decaying tissue back to the earth. If I shoot a squirrel in the woods or if I chop down a tree, what presents itself? Bacteria and fungi to decompose that material and return it to the earth. That's the case with bacteria and fungi. There is some nuance there when it comes to bacteria consuming toxic flesh, but point being, even like taking tuberculosis bacteria in an isolated form and injecting it into healthy people, they don't get sick. And it's because bacteria is not the cause of illness. Okay. And just to add more fire to that, in every, this is a bold statement, but I can absolutely back it up. So in every single experimental attempt to demonstrate that fluids from a sick person cause disease in a healthy person, they have failed. Here's one example that was conducted during the height of Spanish flu, where 100 volunteers were selected and exposed to the fluids or blood or directly to the patients who were sick with the Spanish flu. And again, we don't want to commit an affirming the consequent fallacy. we are pointing to effects, which are real effects of people getting sick in large quantities and dying at that point in time, but we're trying to determine what is the cause of people getting sick, distinguishing between cause and effects and not conflating the two. So several of the volunteers were injected with infected blood from Spanish flu patients. Several of the volunteers had nasal secretions from Spanish flu patients swabbed in the back of their throats. A handful of the volunteers were taken into Spanish flu wards and had patients open mouth cough in their face. And these are people on their deathbed, right? Had them shake hands, talk at close range. Turns out none of the 100 volunteers in these experiments developed influenza. Milton Rosenau is quoted as saying, "We entered the outbreak with a notion that we knew the cause of this disease and we were quite sure we knew how it was transmitted." See how he's already presupposing, he's already assuming that it's transmitted. And this experiment showed otherwise. And he said, perhaps if we have learned anything is that we are not quite sure what we know about this disease. But this isn't the only example. There's this guy on Twitter named Jamie Andrews who has a thread, and if you want to find it, you can come ask me afterwards and I'll give it to you, but where he's documented countless experimental attempts, and I think he's documented over 60 now. But here's another one. And again, no one became sick in this study. There's one that I want to highlight specifically, though. 0 out of 6 became sick in this study. This one. Okay, so in this one, a control group, they had a control group in the experiment, meaning they exposed a subset of the people to saline placebo. More people became sick when exposed to the saline placebo than to the fluids of a sick person, which sort of goes back to the belief factor and how that plays in. Yeah, we have countless examples. Over 60 studies attempting to demonstrate that illness is spread via the fluids of a sick person, and all of them have failed, every single one of them. Now, there's a piece of context here. So virologists, molecular biologists, immunologists will claim or will push forth studies that claim to have proved pathogenicity or infectivity or contagion. But if you read those experiments, I mean, I had, like, when I was learning this stuff, I boldly said this before I actually knew it, and then I had my molecular biologist submit 2 papers to me. I was like, oh, fuck, dude, like maybe I don't actually know. But then when you read the studies, this is typically what happens. They take an animal that is raised in a lab environment, that is eating an unnatural diet, separate from other animals, in a perpetual state of fight or flight, possibly exposed to other experiments, eating an unnatural diet under fluorescent lights, and then they'll take unfiltered fluid from a sick person or from a cell culture which has all those toxins that I named earlier, and inject it directly into that animal's brain, or pump its stomach full of an absurd amount of it. The animal will sometimes get sick, sometimes it won't, and sometimes it'll die, especially when they inject it directly into their brain. They'll be like, voila, this proves contagion. Does that represent anything happening in nature? No. And then when we have these attempts, still not that natural to take infected blood and do it, but when we have these other attempts that are more natural according to their hypothesis, all of them have failed. So the appearance of contagion, again, most likely exposure to similar toxins, similar eating habits, shared emotional trauma, fear/belief, shared exposure to non-native EMF. So when we're getting sick in proximity to other people, it's likely those things. But again, I'm a dad. I have 2 kids. I know what it's like. I have one kid gets sick right after the other. They have similar symptoms, and we eat super healthy. We're outside a lot. So there's got to be more going on here in some cases, right? I get it. I totally get it. And I want to be clear here. I am not making an assertion regarding this. Like, this is my hypothesis or series of hypotheses for what might be the cause. And I acknowledge that because the scientific community has been so myopically focused on this unproven idea, no funding, relatively no funding, has gone to explore any of these other possible phenomena for the cause of this phenomena or these phenomena. Okay, so seasonality. In the fall or winter, your body likely experiences some detoxification symptoms: coughing, sneezing, fever, diarrhea, vomiting, etc. When we're exposed to less sunlight, spending less time outdoors, we are spending more times indoors amongst toxic substances in our home, immersed in the field of non-native electromagnetic fields, sweating and detoxifying less, and eating and drinking way too much during various holidays. And some of these may not apply to you, but in general, this is what happens in the fall and the winter time. And I think it's that our bodies, I hypothesize that it's our bodies doing what they're supposed to do to detoxify, to force cells to detoxify for the long winter months when we're going to be experiencing all this. Just like the trees shed their leaves all at the same time. In the fall, to conserve energy, prepare for the winter, it's us doing the same thing at the beginning of the fall or throughout the winter. And then in the spring, once we've accumulated all those toxins and the weather starts to warm up, we might get sick a little bit again. And we have the nerve to think that our bodies are broken and that we've caught a virus. So some other questions to ponder. How do women's menstrual cycles sync? How do we feel someone looking at us? How can we sense that someone is talking about us, even someone far, far away? Your ears were ringing, right? How can we feel that someone has bad vibes? How can we sense that someone is lying? How do you explain those seemingly, quote, contagious phenomena? Right? I mean, I don't think there's a menstrual cycle virus passing from woman to woman. Maybe there is, I don't know. Okay, so this experiment was done in the 1980s by this Russian scientist where he took 2 cell cultures and he exposed one of them to a bunch of toxic substances and had a window, just a normal glass window in between. When he had the normal glass window, nothing happened to the culture on the other side of that window. But when he had a quartz crystal in between, glass in between the cultures, when he put toxins on one of the culture on the other side of that quartz glass experienced the same effects without ever having any of the toxins on it. Think about the implications for electromagnetism and in some form of bioresonance. Okay, so we all have what's called a biofield surrounding our bodies. A lot of people here, definitely people at this event, will call it an aura. But we all have it's not a woo-woo thing, it's real. We all have a measurable and observable electromagnetic field. This is a term coined by the National Institute of Health. This image comes from a dear friend of mine, Eileen McCusick. And this is what is surrounding our bodies. It's like this plasmic biofield. That's an electromagnetic field that surrounds our bodies and surrounds the bodies of all living things. Before I get to that, is it far-fetched to think that maybe if I have reached a certain threshold of toxicity, that I may communicate via my biofield to those who I'm in proximity to quite a bit, hey, I'm detoxing, you're in the same environment as me, our fields are often syncing up and overlapping, maybe it's time for you to experience a detox too. And if you've reached a certain threshold of toxicity, you detox. If you haven't, you don't. And then that kind of appears like, quote, immunity, right? If you don't need to detox, you don't detox. And Eileen has this quote that she always says, a strong, coherent field will always overtake a weak, incoherent field. What she really means by that is a strong, coherent field is not going to be impacted because it's not in need of a detox. But if you're in need of a detox, you may detox. Okay, so who's familiar with Veda Austin? Okay, a few people, that's great. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Veda, she studies water, and she is showing, I would say, it's empirical evidence at this point because she teaches workshops all around the world and other people are repeating it. And she is showing conclusively that water holds memory, reflects our reality back to us, has its own symbol-based language, and that water communicates with us and through us. So here's some examples of Veda's work. What she does is she takes water in a petri dish, exposes it to a thought, a feeling, a frequency, a written word, a song, sets it next to her bedside at night and sets the intention for water to show her what she's dreaming. And here's some examples of what water reflects back. So water was shown the written number 4, frozen image of water or in the ice, and braid, ice's response, ice response there with a leaf, a picture of her friend's face. And again, the important point to note here is that she is not making this shit up because other people are repeating her experiments and getting the exact same results. She teaches workshops all the time on this. And here's some more examples. And what she's found too is that water has its own symbol-based language aside from these artistic expressions. Like one of the examples is when Veda is feeling or other people are feeling gratitude, or it's a song that represents gratitude, or gratitude written out in English or in Spanish or in Chinese, and she puts water over it and then freezes it. Water always has a 6-pointed leaf. That's water's symbol for gratitude. For gratitude / love, I think. Actually, love might be a heart. But it's essentially showing that water has its own mechanism of communication. Okay, so water does not lie. Right, right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's incredible. Same with our body. I mean, that's how like our bodies, when we feel someone, especially someone we're close with, who our biofields are overlapping with, lie to us, we know it. We feel it. It's because the water in our bodies are impacted. We're water-based beings. Right. Okay, so this, Joe, you were here for this. You were here for this event. So with my former organization, Health Freedom for Humanity, we held an event on this farm in Southern California that unfortunately is no longer my friend Molly's farm, but we had a really incredible event that Veda spoke at. And Veda took some eggs from Molly's farm. And on this farm were chickens that are raised regeneratively as chickens should be. They're not put in, these cages and pumped with hormones and antibiotics and vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. And Veda so on the far left, that's the common crystallography or frozen egg albumin of eggs that are coming from battery farmed or, caged eggs, right? That's what the frozen image of the albumin looks like. The one in the middle is the crystallography of the free-range chicken eggs. So that's what the albumin looks like on free-range chickens. So Veda set a caged egg next to a free-range egg for some time and then cracked them open and froze the albumin. And what she found in the far right, remember this is what is typical of a caged egg. After just being in proximity to a free-range egg, this is what the caged egg looks like now. And someone reached out to her and was like, yeah, that's bullshit. There's no way that you can repeat that. So then Veda took one free-range egg and surrounded it with 10 caged eggs. And then she set one caged egg to the side as a control. And this is the original free-range egg. Here's the caged eggs that were just in proximity to the free-range egg. And then this one at the bottom was the one she set to the side as a control. Now think about that with respect to the human body. Right? Pretty incredible, right? Okay. So human beings are made up of nearly 2/3 water by weight and over 9 out of 10 molecules. I don't know about molecules, but that's another story. 9 out of 10 molecules in our body are water. Like the egg, is it possible that when someone is experiencing symptoms, the water in their body communicates with the waters of others who are in need of detoxification, communicating from the water through the human biofield to the human biofield of another person, thus impacting their water? Especially because Gerald Pollack, who is a water researcher, works at Washington University, one of the only truly alternative researchers that gets grant funding, but is still very much hated by the mainstream because he is essentially turning on its head all of water research and all of cellular biology, because he is demonstrating in experiments that our cells are lined with what's called fourth phase water, and fourth phase water is what is able to transmit and store and retain and reflect back information. So again, when we're communicating possibly via these overlapping biofields, it's communicating to the cells in our body, who then, if you go back to this experiment, no different than this. This is what's happening between us, right? As human beings. Okay. Let's see. Okay, symptoms of illness and our beliefs. Are symptoms bad? Are symptoms something to fear? Is our body simply doing what it was designed to do to heal? And I put forth that symptoms are not something bad, and they're not something to fear. Even the really, really tough ones, our bodies are simply doing exactly what they were designed to do to heal. Now, when we try to suppress them or when we're perpetually fearful of them, we can prolong them and make them worse. Or if we're feeding ourselves toxic substances, and especially toxic thoughts and toxic feelings, then we can prolong them, and that leads to chronic illness. So why is this important? Okay, first off, truth is important. Reality is important. And I just love exploring the truth about this realm that we're in. Every single piece of the COVID-19 narrative rests on the shoulders of the completely unproven claims surrounding SARS-CoV-2. So literally everything that happened over the last 4 years rests on the idea that SARS-CoV-2 exists and causes disease. Everything that happened, literally everything, think about that, rests on those foundational experiments that I showed earlier. That is crazy, crazy. Our conditioned beliefs surrounding disease and the phenomenon of two people getting sick are upholding this disproven paradigm. Much of allopathic medicine, the entire vaccine program, rests on this disproven paradigm. Literally the entire vaccine program. And again, I respect the work of people who are out there fighting for, quote, safer vaccines to some degree, because at least they're sort of on the right track, but there's no conversation for safer vaccines if there's no such thing as viruses. Like, none of it matters. All of it's bullshit. And that's why I think this is so important, and there are some people, unfortunately, in the health freedom space who refuse to talk about this. And that's a little bit alarming to me. Because the masses are entrenched in this unproven paradigm, we fail to explore the true nature of health and fail to fund science associated with it. We have no idea how brilliant we are. Literally, we have no clue. And we're not putting funding towards those things, at least not enough, because A, we're still myopically focused on this unproven paradigm, but B, all the funding goes towards that. So we are completely missing the mark, even, quote, natural approaches to health. Naturopathic doctors, doctors of chiropractic, traditional Chinese medicine practitioners a long time ago were never taught this. They never considered contagion, neither did Ayurvedic practitioners. But now in the modern day, even all the alternative schools put forth the idea that germs cause illness, when it's literally unproven that they cause illness, unproven that viruses even exist, but for bacteria and fungi, unproven that they even cause illness. Symptoms are not something to fear. Your body's doing what it's supposed to do. We fear and or try to manipulate or suppress our body's innate intelligence, and we only perpetuate our own suffering. Okay, so there's a lot of what about questions. What about measles? What about chickenpox? What about loss of taste and smell? What about this? What about that? So I put together an educational experience called The End of COVID alongside several brilliant people. It's been viewed by over 130,000 people now, which is incredible. But we definitely need to get more people viewing this information. And this educational experience consists of 90 videos that are mostly presentations going into great detail. Like, I'm talking hour to hour and a half long segments on topics that I covered here. So what I squeezed into this, I don't know how long I've been going, hour, we cover in 108 hours, going into great detail on all of this stuff, on any question we could think of, as we were wrestling with our own cognitive dissonance. Okay, how do you explain measles? So we did a whole thing on measles, chickenpox, all of those things that are commonly asked. You can find that at theendofcovid.com. And just for Conscious Life Expo attendees, we have a code. If you enter Expo at checkout, you get 30% off at theendofcovid.com. I did, and he was one of the only doctors who does not agree with what we were saying, but the segment he provided, ironically, also lended credence to our whole ideas, because he talked about, if I remember correctly, mortality data regarding how there was absolutely no pandemic if you look objectively at the mortality data. Okay, sorry, that's for Acapulco. Okay, this is my organization, The Way Forward. We have a growing membership platform. We have roughly 800 members or so, and continuing to grow, where you can type in your zip code and find people near you. You can pay what you want to be a part of our organization. We're based on a value for value model. Okay, and sorry, I'll go back to that. Yeah, thewayforward.com. And then these are resources I highly recommend on things that I discussed today. So just take a picture of those. Yeah, it's Amanda Vollmer. I don't know why that's her name, but I really respect her. Okay, so I have a short 12-minute video. This is probably the key video for the end of COVID. Is there any way we could dim the lights? Is that possible? Okay. You guys will really like this video. People cry oftentimes watching this. It's really incredible.
What if my body is brilliant? If the following questions inspire curiosity, please share this video with others and ask them to join you on your journey of discovery. What if my body is brilliant and everything it does is part of a strategy to survive and thrive? What if every incomprehensibly intricate process my body attempts is simply its best path forward given whatever resources and roadblocks are present at the moment? Given that billions of my cells purposefully die each day to brilliantly allow for constant growth and adaptation, and physical injuries, stress, and exposure to toxins result in additional cellular death, where does all that waste go if I'm not removing it as quickly as I'm producing it? What happens inside my body when it holds too much waste for longer than it should? Does this stagnant swamp of waste damage neighboring healthy tissue, producing a snowball effect of more and more cellular death as waste continues to pile up? What strategies might my body use to get out of this vicious cycle? What if my body recognizes only natural substances and gets confused by synthetic or highly processed things commonly consumed and absorbed, such as artificial flavors and colors, vegetable and seed oils, and microplastics? How does my body deal with these substances when they too are part of the swamp? Given that bacteria in my gut are critically important to the process of breaking down the dead cells of food that I consume, and bacteria have been discovered throughout all parts of a healthy human body, might bacteria also be helpful in breaking down my own dead cell waste as well? What if the concept of good bacteria and bad bacteria is fundamentally wrong? What if all bacteria are simply organisms designed to do one job, eat dead tissue, breaking it into smaller parts which can more readily be eliminated and returned to the earth as part of the circle of life? Given that bacteria produce their own waste in the process of metabolizing dead cells, what if bacteria are only problematic for my body when they produce too much waste as a result of being given a buffet of dead substances to consume? What if bacteria and other microbes are the convenient scapegoat for the true underlying problem, excessive cell death, as caused by a variety of factors? Metaphorically, what if bacteria don't cause the fire, but instead proliferate as nature's attempt to put the fire out? What strategies might my body use to remove the combination of dead cell debris, microbial waste, and synthetic substances if I'm burdened with too many of them all at once? What if I'm not adequately hydrating and my bowel movements are infrequent? What if I'm not exercising enough to sweat out wastes? What are the next steps my brilliant body might take to clean the swamp? What if diarrhea and vomiting are strategies my body uses to remove wastes? What if excessive phlegm and a runny nose is another? What if the symptoms we commonly refer to as being, quote, sick are actually just the necessary steps of healing? What if taking medications designed to end the symptoms of sickness actually prevents my body from healing? What if antibiotics kill my bacteria, which stops them from breaking down unwanted substances, which in turn terminates my natural cleansing process? If my body is unable to remove excess waste via these, albeit unpleasant, symptoms, does it have no choice but to store them deeper? If symptoms aren't the problem, but instead are the solution to something which previously occurred, what if all of modern medicine's efforts are misguided? What if the dramatic increase in chronic ailments over the last century is at least partially due to advancements in suppressing short-term symptoms? If my body is perpetually pushing waste deeper, am I simply trading acute diseases for chronic ones, creating more severe outcomes as I kick the proverbial can further down the road? What if the concept of specific diseases is wrong? What if the root cause of all disease is the same, but the symptoms are different depending on an impossibly nuanced history of the individual? Does this explain how positive results have been observed when treating many types of supposedly distinct diseases with simple water fasting protocols? What if the cure for every disease is simply to remove excess waste and any other impediments, allowing our brilliant bodies to heal naturally? What if that takes drastically longer for some people than others, depending on their unique history and lifestyle habits? With so many variables, how could this idea ever be proven or disproven via clinical trials? What if my mind is the most powerful part of my body and yet another variable? As frequently demonstrated by placebo-controlled studies, thoughts are capable of producing physiological effects. What happens to my body if I'm constantly thinking negative thoughts and harboring unprocessed negative emotions? What if my body is designed to make my actions align with my beliefs? Does this explain how hypochondriacs who believe they will fall victim to disease can experience measurable symptoms? What if I believe that the symptoms I'm suffering from are incurable? Can I actually prevent myself from completing the healing process? Can I only truly be healthy when my mind allows it? By what mechanism does a thought generate a material result? For example, how does the mere observation of a stressful event cause my body to produce a stress hormone? Where do the electrical fields generated by my body fit into this equation? What does the constant bombardment of non-native electromagnetic fields do to my body's natural electrical balance? How does my body react to a full day immersed in, for example, a Wi-Fi network? Can these disharmonious frequencies disrupt my natural processes? Can this be a cofactor in the creation of disease symptoms? Given the complex electrical nature of all living organisms and the evidence that frequency-based communication occurs between cells within my body, might immaterial communication between multiple bodies be possible? Could frequencies coming into harmony with one another explain the phenomenon of menstrual cycle syncing? Shouldn't I expect that many other things are being energetically communicated between living organisms as well? If my body eliminates waste as part of its solution to an underlying problem, and this process resembles a cold or flu, is it possible that I'm capable of energetically communicating this helpful strategy with other people? When they too begin presenting the same detoxification symptoms, wouldn't this appear exactly the same as what we currently call an infectious disease? Is contagion actually just an intelligent communication process leading to mass healing? Because not all people are in need of internal cleanse at the same time, does this explain why syncing frequencies wouldn't necessarily result in spreading the symptoms of disease? Wouldn't this appear exactly the same as our current concept of immunity? Because there are relatively few ways for my body to eliminate waste, can the differences in severity between various respiratory ailments, referred to as colds, flus, bronchitis, pneumonia, etc., be explained simply by differences in the amount of waste needing to be removed and how capable I am at completing this process without complications? Given that virologists have never been able to find supposedly infectious virus particles in fluids taken from an ill person, only showing debris of unknown origin claimed to be viruses at the end stages of a laboratory process involving multiple inputs including toxic substances, is it possible that our current concept of a virus is just a story we never outgrew, originating from an inability to explain the phenomenon of contagion? Given the various experiments from the early 1900s which failed to spread supposedly contagious diseases from one person to another, what if the simple answer to these failures is that they were working with the wrong foundational hypothesis? And because these studies failed at proving their hypothesis, shouldn't alternative hypotheses have been thoroughly investigated over the last 100 years? What if many doctors and scientists over the last century actually have done this work, recognizing the logical errors at the foundation of modern medicine? What if, to the detriment of their careers, they've written many books and papers explaining how humanity has been misled? Would I have heard about these people if my only source of health information came from school textbooks and advertiser-funded news? And even if I had heard of them, would have dismissed them as quacks because their ideas strayed from the norm? What if the foundational principles of modern medicine have already been proven wrong? Given the trillions of dollars wrapped up in pharmaceuticals, hospital systems, medical research, and insurance conglomerates, would this knowledge be suppressed? Is the entire paradigm too big to fail? Do the economic implications become so overwhelming that many are afraid to even entertain the notion of changing course? What if well-intentioned professionals in various fields of healthcare asked themselves all of these questions? What if they concluded that their careers were based on a series of incorrect assumptions presented as indisputable facts during their formal education and training? Could they overcome this crisis of identity, coupled with the guilt from unwittingly leading patients in the wrong direction for years or decades? Could they brave the financial ramifications of no longer practicing within the same broken system? What if people everywhere, in unison, began to recognize that our bodies are brilliant, that we are in control of our own health and are not relying on man-made inventions to fix supposed shortcomings of nature? Instead, what if we looked at what we ate and drank, and how we talked, thought, and felt? What if we demanded that every dollar currently allocated to disease treatments was instead spent on cleaning our air, soil, and water? What if we focused on removing any impediments standing in the way of how nature intended for our bodies to work? What if we were no longer afraid of symptomatic people, and instead embraced them? What if the only bug we can spread is a communication strategy intended to resolve an underlying issue? What if we said thank you when we began experiencing the symptoms of disease, recognizing them instead as signs of healing? What if my body is brilliant, and yours is too? What would the world look like if we all realized this together?
Thank you, guys. That is it. I don't know if I have a few minutes for questions. Anyone have any questions? Yeah, Kat. Yeah. I mean, it can help. I think it would, depending on the type of crystal, like if you're wearing quartz, it would help, yeah, like conduct your, or push out your electromagnetic field. I like when it comes to these devices, they're using quartz in these. But I think I should have clarified a little bit better in that fourth phase water is like a crystalline structure, essentially. And so that's what is likely lining our cells. So yeah, we're all walking around as crystals, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so that's how that would apply to the human body, that experiment. Like again, there's a lot of assumption there, but you can kind of apply that framework to the human body, I would say. Yeah, or at least I do. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I haven't answered anything yet. That was the first one. Yeah. Right. So when you say you got COVID, how do you know you got COVID? Hmm. Don't discount that at all. Yeah, a lot of people have said that. Right. So have we experienced something ever on a world level, on a true world level, that was so traumatic for all of us, that brought up, even for those who are in the freedom movement who may not have been scared of the virus and the tyranny or all the medical stuff, but were fearful of the government, fearful of what may happen if we speak out, fearful of what is going to happen in the future, fearful of our kids, fearful of losing our job, et cetera, et cetera. That perpetual fear builds up. And I think when other people around us are experiencing fear too, that will cause a more harsh detox than what we experience otherwise, right? So did you experience it in the fall or the spring, winter? Right. Right. I think all elections are rigged, but yeah, I hear you though. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it felt very different, but we've never experienced something like this in our lifetimes, right? Last time that something like this happened on a world level truly was World War II or World War I, and what was right around World War I, the Spanish flu, right? So again, that may not be sufficient to answer your question, but like I would have to sit down with you and get like, okay, what did you have going on in your life at the time? What were you eating at the time? What was your environment like? The point is that we need to unglue from the mindset that says one single thing caused this single thing. Rather, it's a bunch of different factors that are unique to the individual, some that are not unique to the individual. Again, like all of us experiencing this perpetual fear. Again, even for people in the freedom movement, I wasn't scared of the virus. I wasn't scared of no bioweapon. That was a shitty bioweapon. There was no bioweapon virus, by the way. But it's the perpetual fear that we're all experiencing of tyranny, of speaking out, of the uncertainty of like, fuck, is the government going to come get me because I'm pretty vocal about this? Like, you know, like it's those things that make detoxification symptoms a little bit more harsh. That's what I hypothesize, essentially. Does that help? Well, okay, so I tend not to, I did name that in like my list of symptoms slide, but I tend not to focus on 5G because what a lot of people do that is quite frustrating is they'll take, okay, it wasn't the virus, so everything that happens was caused by 5G. And that's just not how it works, right? Like, is the prevalence of 5G a large factor in this? Yes, and I would say likely a large factor as it pertains to loss of taste and smell too, because it's not a new technology by any means, but it is new in the sense that this is the first time all of our devices have millimeter wave technology. All the towers around us now have millimeter wave technology. So when we're exposed to this new, again, relatively new toxin in our environment, our bodies are having to adapt. So we're experiencing some weird olfactory symptoms. Like, I know for me, my eyesight's gotten worse over the last 2 years, which you can cure with water fasting. But and a lot of people have said the same thing, that their eyesight has gotten way worse over the last 2 to 3, 4 years because of the exposure to millimeter wave technology, which is why taste and smell is also going too. It's messing with olfactory function. Yeah. Oh shit, there's a lot. Okay, I saw you first. Yeah, well, like in what context? Oh, yeah, 100%. Well, I said vaccines in my slide, though. I did say, yeah, I should. If not a virus, what's making us sick? Let's see. Here, vaccines. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's another rabbit hole for the rabbit hole room. Yeah. What do you have any like specific question related to that? Oh, you're saying being in proximity to other people who are vaccinated. Ah, okay. Yeah, I do not deny that phenomenon at all. So when people say that there is such thing as vaccine shedding, like I recontextualize that in a very big way. I do not think that there is any fucking particle being shed whatsoever. I think it is purely an electromagnetic, possibly pheromonal, so I guess that's technically particles, but possibly pheromonal, probably electromagnetic phenomenon. Because think about this. Are men as impacted by the phenomenon of, quote, vaccine shedding as women? No. Like virtually everyone that I know who's experienced some weird menstrual issues, women who are already in menopause, who all of a sudden got their period again, women passing decidual cast, like all these phenomena typically happen in women. What also happens with women? They sync up on their menstrual cycles. What is also known about women? They are much more intuitive. Better not fucking lie to my wife. Like, the point being is that I think women are much more impacted by the energy, the actual biofields of other people. So if those biofields are sending weird fucked up signals because they just took God knows what, you're going to be impacted by it. You might get like, oh damn, that's alarm bells going off. I need to detoxify. How do women detoxify every month? Their menstrual cycle, right? So that's why I think this is causing this phenomenon in women. I think it's purely electromagnetic. That's what I think. So hope that answers your question. Yeah. Yes. This is a great question. Yeah, so we cover that question quite a bit in this and the end of COVID, theendofcovid.com. Here, and you can take a picture. You can use either of the codes. Okay. Essentially, what is happening? So we have an entire session called the gain of function narrative, and doctors Mark and Sam Bailey two medical doctors out of New Zealand go into great detail describing and actually showing several gain of function experiments and reading exactly what they do. And when you read it, you're like, holy shit, that's what they're doing? It's all based on unproven assumptions. And again, like, I am not saying, and they're not saying, and most people don't say all virologists are in on it. Like, people are like, oh, Alec, how can you possibly say that? Are you saying all virologists are in on this grand scheme? And my response is typically, do you think all doctors are in on COVID? Are they all in on it? No, they're just doing what they were taught, right? It's the same thing with virologists. So when it comes to these gain of function experiments, it's a series of unproven assumptions in animal models where they'll take material from a cell culture, like I described, right? And they will sequence that genetic material and get a, quote, viral genome, a certain viral genome. And that's another topic that could be a whole lecture. We have a whole presentation on it during the end of COVID called the SARS-CoV-2 genome, and it describes how they assemble viral genomes. But point being, they then take that material and inject it, and again, that's like a toxic soup of a bunch of shit, inject it directly into a ferret. That ferret doesn't get sick. They take that ferret's nasal secretions and sometimes its nasal tissue, grind it up, inject it into another animal. That one doesn't get sick, and keep doing that over until an animal gets sick. Then they take that genetic material and sequence it, and the sequence that they get, of course, because it's a fucking crude biological sample with RNA and DNA of unknown origin, is slightly different than the sequences from the original one. So they'll say, oh, this is a mutated virus. This is a gain-of-function virus. And another important point, on episode 40 of my podcast, I interviewed Dr. David Martin, whom a lot of people point to and say, well, he's saying there's a gain-of-function virus. He has all the patents, et cetera, et cetera. So if you listen to David talk, listen to his talk at the European Parliament, he never says virus. He says viral model. And that stuck out to me. I'm like, he knows. This dude knows. So I interviewed him. It took me 40 minutes for him to get a clear answer out of him because he tried to wiggle out of it. But I thought it was very important because people refer to him as the guy to say that there's a gain-of-function virus. I got him to admit that there is not and never has been a transmissible particle. There has not been, and gain of function is all about deriving synthetic sequences for the shot. He said that on my show very, very clearly. It's all about deriving synthetic sequences for the shots, for the vaccines. Yeah. Okay, Joe, you were next, and then we'll go there and there. I think so. Like, I can't say because I'm not there, right? But I would say yes. Like, they are doing gain-of-function experiments, and they're tricking themselves because they are assuming that this is real. They're assuming what's in these cell cultures is viral material, right? Because they're just going with what they're taught. Now, like, there's millions and millions and millions of dollars pushed towards these labs, right? And people say, like, you're saying they're taking in all this money and it's all fake. What about NASA? What about NASA? What about Bernie Madoff? He had a real paper trail of what he was doing with his clients' money, right? Like, just because there's a paper trail and just because there's funding somewhere doesn't mean that they're actually producing something. Also, you can patent things that are just ideas. You can apply for patents for things that are not actually invented yet. So keep that in mind when it comes to patent-related stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is a good question. I would say the conclusion that I've come to is to yeah. You said drink your urine. It's the best facial, like, skin treatment. I do think so. I'm not kidding. That's another that's a story for another time. The best way is to just live life and have fun and not take things so seriously, and also feel emotions as they arise. Like, when I did a 15-day water fast. Oh, every time I bring that up, my wife's like, "Oh, you did a 15-day water fast? Sick, dude!" Like. But I did a 15-day water fast because I do bring this up a lot because it was a transformational experience for me. And when I did this water fast, I have never felt more connected to myself and to God because I was forced to sit and feel a lot of things that I had never really sat and felt. I could not escape with food. I could not escape with working out. I was forced to just sit and feel my feelings and not escape them. And after I did that, felt incredible. Felt incredible. Yeah. So I think like the biggest thing to work on your biofield is to feel your feelings as they arise, tell the truth to yourself and others, and live a life of integrity and have fun. I'd say that's the best way to squeeze the juice, baby. Yeah. Figuratively and literally. Squeeze the juice. Juice is good too. Gerald Pollack says the best source of fourth phase water is juice. So, okay. She was next. Yeah, you're a member of the Way Forward, aren't you? I recognize. What's your name? Christine. Okay. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry I didn't get you to ask Amanda Vollmer a question on that Q&A. I remember now. That's where, okay. Yeah. Right. Right. Like, are you talking about the people who are in the freedom space who don't speak the truth about virology specifically, or just like, yeah, like how do I approach reality? Like when things are my paradigms constantly being, yeah. That's a great question. So, really good friend of mine, Dr. Edith Ubuntu Chan, kind of asked me the same question. She was like, "How?" And she's someone who is constantly flipping her paradigm too. But point being, she was like, "Doesn't it get like tiring having your paradigm flipped?" And I'm like, "No. For me, it's like a fun exploration process. Like rather than looking at it like, what are these evil motherfuckers hiding from us? I don't look at it that way. And like I know that that's happening. I look at it like, what is the truth about this realm? Like how do I know what I know, and how do other people claim to know what they know? How do they actually know that? How do I actually know that? Right? And it's like just an exploration journey of trying to figure out what is true about this reality. And I think it's fun. Like I know that a lot of what they say, the proverbial they say is bullshit. So I explore otherwise, right? I just continue exploring, and like I'm open to all of it. I'm open to having my paradigm flipped, and I don't look at it in like a fear way. I think because I try not to, and oftentimes fail, to not attach my identity to any perceptions that I currently have. And as long as I don't do that, and again, I fail. Like when it comes to this, like I've done a lot of work on this topic. So if someone presents a paper that demonstrates viral existence someday, I'm gonna be like, fuck, that's really tough. I'm gonna have to tell the truth, but I'm going to do it and say, hey guys, they've actually discovered that viruses are real. I know it's not possible at this point because there's also a lot of shit happening behind the scenes that I can't say right now regarding independent labs that are doing every single line of evidence by virology, and it is incredible, but that will come sometime here soon. All that to say, I think I just am open to exploring reality, and if something that I hold on to as true turns out to not be true, that's okay because I'm not attached to it. I'm just attached to discovering what is true. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Yeah. Right. Yeah. You know, I don't know if this like answers your question or is along the same thread, but like I find myself not fitting in perfectly with any crowd, but I'm okay with that. And I've surrounded myself with people who are also not perfectly fitting in with any crowd, meaning that, like, as an example, there's a subset of the health freedom movement that is very like rah rah. We need to get legislation for the government. I don't subscribe to that. I have overlap with some of those people, but that's not me. And then like I'm over here doing this, but then I have overlap with some of those people, but then also that's not fully me. I don't get caught in identity groups, or I try not to. Like as an example, there's a lot of people who, no bullshit, tried to cancel the end of COVID who are no virus people themselves, like meaning they share the same perspective as me, because I did not exclusively have only no virus people featured during the end of COVID. Like they legit tried to cancel it. And I'm like, see, that's a fucking cult. I don't want to be a part of that. Sorry. Right. And like there's other people who say, yeah, contagion is not a real phenomenon at all. Again, with the context of like 2 or more people getting sick in the same space. I'm sorry, I have kids. I don't fucking buy that. Like there is something electromagnetic at play, possibly, or other possible explanation we haven't explored. Point being that like I don't perfectly align with any group, and I'm okay with that. Is it hard at times? Yeah, but as long as I'm surrounding myself with other people who don't perfectly align with any group, which like I'm so blessed that literally is the epitome of the people that are a part of the way forward, like you, like Joe, like that is the case. The people that go to Music and Sky, the people that go to Confluence, these events that I put on, and my friend Mike Winter puts on, and Alpha Vedic, like our community is so dope because everyone is grounded in reality, deeply embodied spiritually, and just exploring what is true. That's it. And I fucking love it. It's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Mhm. Thank you so much, Carly. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, the biofield. Yeah. Well, see the yes and no, right? Like I welcome if I start experiencing symptoms when around other people, which is really rare. Again, that's why I emphasize that it's likely related to diet, related to toxins, et cetera, rather than like being impacted by the biofield of another person that initiates a detox inside of you, right? Um, so, how do I want to answer this? Yes, you can absolutely shield yourself from that, and again, it's by doing the things that I described earlier. It's by detoxing your emotions and detoxing physically and metaphysically, meaning like you're moving your body, you're sweating, you're out in the sun, you're standing bare feet on bare earth, you're breathing deeply, doing meditation, qigong, prayer, kundalini yoga, something like that. And then metaphysically detoxing, meaning that you're actually feeling your emotions as they arise and not allowing your emotions to drive you and overcome you and dictate your life, and not suppressing them, allowing them to flow through you, feeling them to completion, and then letting them go, not clinging on to them. Right? I think those are the things that allow you to not be as impacted by the biofields of those around you. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah. Yeah. But then the important thing is it's still your responsibility to make sure that you are okay. Like, um, I think at times in my life, and it's easier for me to say as a man because women are much more, I think, for the most part, impacted by the energy of other people, and I acknowledge that. I totally acknowledge it. That's why women are so intuitive. I'm a pretty intuitive guy, but anyway, the point is that like I don't subscribe to the belief that other people really have that much power over me. Like I look at it like if they triggered a detox in me, that means there's something in me that needed to come out. It wasn't that like, oh, it's their fault. It was me. Like I yeah, well, yeah, right. Well, like think about this. If I was speaking Chinese to you and I said "fuck you" in Chinese, but I said it with a smile and a really happy smile on my face, you would take that as like, "Oh, wow, what a nice person," right? Point being that it's all your perception of me or what other people are saying, and that is your responsibility, not the other person's. So like when I get so frustrated with much of the health freedom movement that points at like, look what they're doing to us, look at what they're doing to us. I don't discount that they're trying to do some shit to us, but we consent to it. We say yes to it. Sorry. Do I have to get you saying wrap up? Okay, sorry. I have time for one more question, I think. Yes, sorry, it's dark. I can barely see. Why are you calling them viral though? Think about that first. Like who is saying they're viral? Hmm. Yeah. So you've just named them that. Right. So think of it like this, right? So if we, okay, first, if we're making the assumption that what is occurring in a cell culture is actually representative of what happens in a complex physical, chemical, spiritual, electric, emotional, biological being, that's an assumption. But if we are playing with that assumption, then what we can take from these cell culture experiments, sorry, this cacao is strong, it's a little spicy. What we can take from those experiments is that when someone is poisoned, when someone is malnourished, or, this is not done in culture, but when in Veda Austin's work it is, right, with water in a petri dish, when there is proliferation of negative emotions, cells experience a cytopathic effect, meaning break down to a bunch of fragments. And again, they point to those fragments, which is literally just cellular debris, and say that they're viruses, right? So that's what people have falsely attributed as viral, a cell just breaking down into a bunch of fragments after it's been starved and poisoned. Possibly, and that's where it gets a little tricky, man, because again, that's based in viral genomes, which are literally just assembled fragments of RNA of unknown origin. So that's where it might get a little bit tricky in that case. But essentially, yes, and that's where like other people have recontextualized the word virus to mean, oh, it's not a pathogen. Viruses are good for us. I'm like, stop using that fucking word because virus implies a pathogenic agent that is passed from person to person. That's not a thing, right? So that's where I don't use the word. There's other people who know what I know and share the same thing and say, I use virus in a different way now. It's like I don't use it at all. Cellular debris. Yeah, cellular debris. Yeah. You'd have to go to whoever invented this machine and validate how they determine that is what it is. Yeah. There's no such thing as Epstein-Barr virus. It's not specific though either. That's the thing. Because and again, that's where you'd have to see how they validated this machine. Yeah, you can go ahead, Caroline. Exactly. Yeah. Well, this is where it gets a little tricky because then it depends on how they validated that instrument. Because did they validate it based on the viral genome? Because that's nonsense. Did they validate it based on a certain set of symptoms? Because symptoms of Epstein-Barr virus, as an example, are a plethora of symptoms across the board. So how did they validate that energy frequency is Epstein-Barr virus? Does that make sense? Like, you'd have to see how they actually did that. No, yeah, and like I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying they're misattributing a name. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. I hate, like, personally, I despise naming symptoms and categorizing them at all. I think it's literally just depending, just like that video said, depending on that person's unique set of circumstances, that's the way they're detoxing. That's the way they're expressing symptoms. I'm glad you see that too. So, okay, I can answer more out there if you guys want or whatever, but thank you so much for being here.